School. I want to make sure that that was caught. I just want to thank everybody for being here for the community circle for Lynwood Elementary School and a discussion around the 7-Eleven committee process to date. As you're all aware, the 7-Eleven committee has been meeting throughout the winter and has made a recommendation that they will be made a decision that they will be recommending to close one Nevada Unified School District elementary school to the board, and that is most likely to go to the board in May. And so far they've narrowed it down to 3 schools, and those 3 schools are Lou Sutton, Lynwood, and Rancho. And we know that this is a very difficult topic. This is not something that any of us go into education to do, any board member is elected to the board to do, or anybody goes into education to close an elementary school. It's one of the hardest topics we could ever have to deal with. And so, you know, we want to acknowledge how hard this is for any school community, and want to do our best to be transparent with you and be present to answer the questions that you have that we can help with. So tonight I'm going to give you a short presentation, and then we're going to move into what's called the thought exchange, which we will explain a couple of times moving forward. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and I'm going to launch my presentation. Just give me 1 minute here to get us started. All right, so again, thank you for being here tonight. We see we have a great turnout. Tonight, we're going to go through these steps. We're going to talk about some of our district goals, particularly as they pertain to the 7-Eleven committee. We're going to talk about the demographic outlook and projections for NUSD over the next 10 years. We're going to talk about why we formed a 7-Eleven committee. We're going to talk about the progress and process to date. We're going to talk about some site-specific data for Lynwood Elementary School. And then we're going to take you through a thought exchange. And this is going to be the most important part of the meeting. So in the thought exchange, what we're going to do is we're going to give you 6 minutes to share with us your thoughts, comments, questions about the discussion that we have tonight. And then you are going to have the opportunity to rate the questions, thoughts, comments from others. And then I'm going to go through those questions and answer as many of them as I can with the time that we have available to us. So again, we'll circle back to that. We'll explain that one more time at the end of my presentation. So the district goals that apply to the 7-Eleven committee are these. We need to make sure that the decisions that the district is making ensure that we have short and long-term fiscal, that we are acting in a way that is both short and long-term. Geez, slow down, Mr. Koska. We need to make sure that we have short and long-term fiscal responsibility for our district. We need to make sure that we're attracting and retaining high-quality teachers and staff, and we really do that by making sure that we are being fiscally responsible. We need to make sure that some of our most important assets, our property, are being used in the best possible way for the future of Nevada. So here's a chart that demonstrates what our enrollment has looked like and is projected to look like between now and 2031. So you can see, you can see that in around 2011, between 2011 and 2013, we were hovering right around 8,000 students. We got down to a low of 7,658 a couple of years ago. This is when we brought in Target River to help us with some marketing campaigns. We saw an increase in enrollment as a result of that and other variables. And then through COVID, we've seen a pretty precipitous drop-off of enrollment. Now, we anticipate that we're going to see a bit of a rebound from COVID, and that's why you see us going up from 7,442 to 7,545. However, our future enrollment projections look pretty bleak, and they have us down well below 7,000 at 6,817 by the 2030 year. We've been experiencing declining enrollment for several years. This has peaked at our elementary schools. There are lots of different thoughts about why this is happening. Some people believe that it's because we're losing so many students to private schools. And while we have lost some to private schools, especially through COVID, the primary driver of this is that there's simply less children living in Novato. So between 2010 and 2019, we've seen a decrease of 1,050 fewer school-age children living in the city of Novato. Between 2012 and 2018, we've seen our elementary enrollment drop by by about 600 students, about 100 students in each class. So we've seen classes go from about 550 kindergartners to about 450 kindergartners over that time. When we do projections for elementary enrollment, the hardest numbers to pick are transition kindergarten and kindergarten. The way that we do that is very, very complex, but one of the key data points that we focus on is live births in our zip codes. And what we see when we look at that information is that over the last, the projections for the next 3 years are the lowest that we've ever seen. There was a precipitous drop off in the number of births in Marin County following the Great Recession, and those numbers simply haven't rebounded and continue to decrease. And as I shared, our enrollment is projected to fall below 7,000 at the end of this decade. So here's some data that's specific to Lynwood. The 7-Eleven committee has reviewed a large amount of data on all of the NUSD schools. And you can find all of that information on the NUSD 7-Eleven committee webpage. So feel free to Google NUSD 7-Eleven committee and you will find that page. You can see all of the videos of our past meetings. You can see all of the data that's been shared at those meetings. So here's some information about Lynwood School. So I'm going to focus more on the 2019-20 data because the 2021 data has been pretty significantly impacted by COVID. And the 19-20 data is the pre-COVID numbers. The numbers are fairly similar for Lynwood, more different for some other schools. You can see that in the total residents is the number of school-age children that are attending schools in our district that live in the Lynwood attendance area. And you can see that there are 363. 207 of those students are enrolled at Lynwood. So that means about 43% of the children in the Lynwood attendance area are not attending Lynwood School. Lynwood also sees some in-migration. So this is students who live in other attendance areas coming to Lynwood. That's about 25.8% of the students. So when you do a combination of the number of students transferring out and the number of students that are transferring in, you find that it is a negative 71 students is the net migration. And the free or reduced lunch program participation at Lynwood is 60.2%. 45% of the students are English learners and 69.5% are Latinx or Latino, Latina. So one of the questions that we've been getting asked a lot is why did we form a 7-Eleven committee to begin with? The primary reason is that we need to make sure that we are having the best use of our district resources. We need to make sure that we're being fiscally responsible. We need to make sure that we're able to provide efficient school operations, and it is very hard to do that as schools get smaller. We've had significant declining enrollment over the last 10 plus years, and we anticipate that for the future 10 years. And we've just seen significant rising costs. So the purpose of the 7-Eleven committee is to advise the board based on community input regarding the use or disposition of school buildings, space, or properties that's not needed for school purposes. This is something that's outlined in California Education Code. And this next statement is particularly important for Lynwood in that the 7-Eleven committee does not advise the board on specialized programs. So the 7-Eleven committee does advise the board on whether or not they believe a school should be closed. They do not make a recommendation about what the board should do with the specialized programs that occur on those campuses. That would be something that the board would have to tackle. So this is not the first time that NUSD has gone through school closure. It's gone through it many times in the distant past and once in the relative recent past with the closing of Hill Middle School. One of the things that we heard from the community as it pertains to the Hill Middle School closure was that that process was rushed, and there were different reasons for why that was rushed. We were in the midst of a significant fiscal crisis. But the community has encouraged us to, if we're going to go through this process, again, we need to make sure that we give it sufficient time. So the schedule as outlined now, should the board approve the closure of an elementary school, would be that they would make that decision in May of 2021, and that the closure would not take effect until August of 2022. So this would give the district 15 months to make all of the difficult decisions and develop a smooth plan for implementing the school closure process. So here's some of the work that the 7-Eleven committee has done to date. In the beginning, we shared with them information pertaining to our goals, as I've shared with you. We talked to them about what it's like to work in a public process like this and the Brown Act rules associated with that. We shared with them detailed information for each of the elementary school sites, including the way that the rooms are used, can be used, capacity, enrollment and resident trends, investments that have been made on those campuses, facility needs, and potential for other uses. In the end, the committee used all of that information to narrow down the list of schools that could be potentially closed to 3. And so moving forward, what the committee will do, will look at the different scenarios associated with the closure of any of those 3 schools. They'll see even more data and really get into the weeds about what it would mean to close any of those 3 schools. The first opportunity for the committee to reach a decision would be at next week's 7-Eleven committee meeting. And after that, they would begin preparing a final report to go to the Board of Trustees at a special board meeting, which is scheduled for May 25th. And that'll be held at Novato High School. So again, the upcoming dates, these meetings all happen through Zoom webinar. These meetings occur at 5:30 p.m. The meetings coming up are April 21st, April 28th, May 5th if needed, and then as I just mentioned, May 25th, there will be a special board meeting at the Gordon Gym at Novato High School. That meeting would be an in-person meeting. All right, so I mentioned a little bit about thought exchange. This is the way that we're going to hear your thoughts and questions, and then we're going to do our best to respond to as many of those as possible. It's really important, before I turn it over to Leslie, that we realize that I'm going to be focusing on the thoughts and questions that are present in the thought exchange. I'm not going to be focusing on thoughts and questions that are in the chat. So please, when we go through this process, make sure that you put your thoughts into the thought exchange so that they can be heard and they can be rated by your peers. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Communications, Leslie Benjamin, and she's going to talk with you about thought exchange.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Here we go. So we're now going to go through the thought exchange where you can enter your thoughts and questions. And as Chris mentioned, you can rate other thoughts and questions on a scale of 1 to 5 stars. The question is based on the presentation you saw. Move that over. What are your thoughts and questions? And there's 3 ways to join the thought exchange. One is through the QR code right here on the screen, or I am putting the link here in the chat bar. And also you can go to tejoin.com and enter in this code. So we'll take about 6 minutes or so for everyone to enter their thoughts and questions. I'll give everyone a few minutes, a minute or so to log in, and there's 2 brief survey questions before I start the timer, and you'll be able to see how much time is left. So I just want to remind everyone to enter in your thoughts and questions and then to rate them. So go ahead and log in. As I said, I'll wait until I start seeing some participants before I start the timer.
So again, 3 ways to log in. You can use your camera on your cell phone to do the QR code. We see we got over 40 now. You can go to the website that was just added to the chat bar, or you can go to tejoin.com and then put in this 9-digit code. If you're having problems with any of that, please put something in the chat so that we can help you join the thought exchange. It's important to us that you're able to do that.
So you can see there we have many participants and thoughts are coming in and ratings are coming in. And on the left-hand side, you can see the people and the thoughts that are out there. And this will, on the right-hand side, will start filling up with your questions and comments. And it is in multiple languages. It can be in Spanish, or if there's another language, it will pop up in the language that you would like. And you can, I believe, enter in more than one thought or question. So we've got about a minute and a half left. Just wanted to let you know. When the time is up, I will close the exchange and then turn it over to Chris to start responding. Okay, add another 30 seconds as I saw more thoughts coming in, and then we'll close it. Okay, I'm going to close the exchange and turn it over back to you, Chris.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for sharing these thoughts and these questions. We have 92 of them. We'll do our best to get through as many of them as possible. We'll find that some of them are probably repeats, and so that'll help bring the number down a little bit, but we'll start cranking away at it. Let's not waste any more time. So the highest ranked thought is, if Lynwood closes, how would students of every grade level who started in the DI program be supported through the 5th grade? And so one of the things that I want to remind the community of is that closing Lynwood Elementary School does not mean closing the dual immersion program. It means that the dual immersion program would not be at Lynwood. The board would have some important decisions to make about the future of the dual immersion program, and whether they believe that that can exist on another school campus, and whether or not it should be the same size that it is or smaller than it is, and then how they make that happen. Parents, in letters to the 7-Eleven committee, the board, and to myself, have pointed out that none of the schools have sufficient vacancy to be able to take on a program of this size, and that is a true statement as long as the school's boundaries remain the same. But we can adjust the size of schools by changing boundaries. And boundaries are going to be changed, need to be changed for a number of different schools as a direct impact of this school closure, whether that's Lynwood or Rancho or Lou Sutton. So I think that's very important to state out front. You know, I have long been a believer in dual immersion programs, particularly here in Novato, but I also was a part of starting the Pueblo Vista dual immersion program here in Napa, which is a very large, very successful program. And so, you know, I would be encouraging of us finding a way to keep this program going, whether Lynwood is closed or another school is closed. And I believe that we've made a commitment to our families who've enrolled their children in the program, and we would need to work with the board. I would be supportive of working with the board to encourage that in the event that the dual immersion program is closed, we find a way to support our students through their completion of elementary school. If Lynwood is closed, what will happen to the free to NUSD preschool and aftercare programs that these families desperately need and can walk to? Those are two different categories. So I believe, and I would support in the event that Lynwood were closed, that the preschools would continue to operate on the Lynwood campus if at all possible. We will have to follow the rules for the ACES program, or what you call something else, but your aftercare program that is funded through the ACES program. And we would have to, usually those programs follow the children. So it would be dependent upon where the children go. We have looked into how we would transfer that program if need be, and we're prepared to implement that process if we get to that point. All right, will you educate the 7-Eleven committee that there is no testing data for the Lynwood dual immersion program? Yes, if we get into looking at student assessment data as part of the decision for this, I'm very prepared to talk with the 7-Eleven committee about the impact of the dual immersion instructional methodology and how it impacts test scores, particularly in the early grades, which is where we are with the build out of the dual immersion program. So yes, I'm very comfortable in sharing that information with them and making sure they understand that that these students will catch up and probably be ahead by the time they finish this program. Why is Lynwood compared equally with traditional schools when looking at net migration numbers? I think that net migration numbers are important. It's important to know that there's a large group of families in the attendance boundary that are choosing to not attend that program. I think it would be a mistake for us to not look at that. I think it's also important for us to celebrate that Lynwood is also drawing a lot of families into the Lynwood community. So, you know, I think that's an important data point for every one of our schools. And so that's why we looked at it, not only at Lynwood, but at every school. 24 looks like it's a success. I haven't looked super closely at the numbers, but even the slide from my presentation showed that it wasn't significantly different. Lynwood has maintained most of their children even through the pandemic. And, you know, I appreciate that as a success for the culture at Lynwood, for the teachers, and for that community. Why haven't the committee members been educated about the dual immersion school, how it works, the reasons Lynwood was selected? We haven't gotten into the specifics of any of the programs at any of the schools. You know, if this comes up, I'm certainly comfortable with sharing it. I was one of the people that was on the original tours going down to San Diego and coming back full of excitement to build this program out, take the time that it takes to get this right. And so I'm very comfortable speaking with the committee about that topic. Why is the district not happy with our enrollment numbers? The original blueprint goals are being met. The original goals when planning the Lynwood conversion to dual immersion was that the school would grow. The school has grown a little bit. I don't recall that the long overarching goal is 2 classes per grade. I'll have to review that document. The reality is that, you know, we have to look at the economics of running small schools. And we have some small schools in our community, and we've got to be considering that as we look at some of our future fiscal challenges. Why have you not educated the committee on the real implications of closing Lynwood? We are not just a program, but a whole school. No campus has the room. So if they did, 2 schools would be displaced. I talked a little bit about this early on. You know, There are ways that we could have the dual immersion operate on another campus. It would be complicated. We will certainly be discussing that as we get into the scenarios for the 3 schools that are remaining. Instead of cost per student, why doesn't the committee make decisions based on equity, the district's values, and a profile of the graduate? I do agree with the latter concept in the second part there, the cost student data obscures race income needs. We should spend more on the students who need more. That's how equity works. I agree with that. I also agree that we need to close the school. And this is a hard decision to make. And when you look at the practicality of closing schools, and the distances that students need to travel to get to schools, it isn't a big surprise that the 3 schools that remained on the list were the ones that are the most practical to close. They're the ones that are in the center of Novato, that are closer to other schools, that allow opportunities for us to redraw boundaries and have students to still be close to the elementary school that they end up attending. I do think that equity needs to be one part of the puzzle, but I don't think it can be the whole part of the puzzle. What criteria is the district considering for future housing developments? How does that impact the decision-making process for the committee? We like the idea of affordable housing for teachers, but the most marginalized students should not be displaced from their schools. I would be tremendously surprised if we ended up building staff housing on any of the elementary school campuses that would be closed. I anticipate that any of the programs would be used for other educational purposes. But again, we're far from being in a position to make that decision. When you review test scores with the 7-11 committee, will you educate them about the biases in standardized testing as it pertains to dual immersion? And I mentioned that earlier. I'm absolutely very comfortable talking about the impact of the instructional methodology for dual immersion on test scores, particularly in the early grades. Happy to do that, should that topic come up. I think that's the same topic as the next question. If the district scales down or ends the DI school, what is your plan to support Lynwood's English learners to close the achievement gap? We believe that in Novato, we have great schools. And when we move our students from whatever school is closed, we believe they're going to end up at a great school that has great resources and that is committed to closing the achievement gap. We've been working very hard on that for several years, mostly supported by our partnership with the Marin Community Foundation and the Haas Foundation. We're very appreciative of those partners in this work. And we believe that we're going to get the students from whatever school is closed in front of teachers and in the classes with teachers and great students who are going to help them achieve that goal of closing the achievement gap. What plans does the district have to market the DI school in the future? We worked closely with Principal Diaz in the past to market this program, and we'll continue to do so. We have other specialized programs in our system, for example, Marin School for the Arts and STEM Marin. The primary responsibility for that marketing work has typically done by the school sites with support from the district office. That hasn't changed for Lynwood, but we will continue to support in this work. And we've also supported in this work through our past Target River campaign. Will you educate the 7-11 committee on why DI test scores are expected to be lower until 5th to 8th grade? Absolutely, I've touched on that a couple of times. And so very happy to do that. And I 100% agree with that statement. Will the committee consider the feasibility of moving the DI school to a new site as part of its decision-making? The committee does not have the authority to close a school program, yet if it selects Lynwood, it will effectively end the dual immersion school. As I've shared, the board would have to take on that responsibility for that decision. There are multiple ways to make that happen. And so, yes, we would be happy to explore that with the board, but that would not be the responsibility of the 7-Eleven committee. Why are materials still not available in Spanish and translation? Not provided for 7-Eleven and board meetings. Will you commit to this moving forward? Yes. So all of our meetings, in our agendas, we say if you need translation, please let us know and we will make sure that we have it available. That's for all board meetings and for all 7-Eleven committee meetings. Knowing that we will be talking about several important topics, particularly to our Spanish community, without anybody informing us, we will have translation provided at all of the 7-Eleven and board meetings. We will also be translating our minutes for 7-Eleven and board meetings into both English and Spanish. So that will all be available moving forward. Number 18, will Ron Gerber or other members of the committee recuse themselves of voting on a school closure if there are conflicts of interest? Ron Gerber is a redeveloper who used to work for Novato and put forward the proposition to close Lynwood, Lou Sutton, or Rancho on 3/24. You know, happy to reach out to Ron to see if there are any conflicts of interest. The fact that he used to work for Novato would not, what he has done in the past would not necessarily be a conflict of interest, but happy to check with him to see if he believes that there is a conflict of interest. If there is a conflict of interest, then people should be recusing themselves from voting. How is it that 2 of the schools on the closure list have some of the largest English language learner, low income, and Latinx populations? I don't know the answer to that question. I know that the 7-Eleven committee was presented with a lot of data on a lot of schools. They looked at the maps, they went through the process, and these were 2 of the 3 schools that were recommended moving forward. You know, part of it is, as I shared earlier, is location and the practicality of being able to close a school. You know, an example that I used in last night's meeting with Lou Sutton is Olive. Olive is one of our smaller schools. If we were to close Olive, it would be exceedingly difficult to safely get those students from Olive to the schools that we would need to transfer them to. And so that's one of the reasons that Olive wasn't considered. How can you justify breaking the promise to Lynwood families that this program would last through 5th grade, or else put our kids at a disadvantage? Not breaking any promises. As I've shared repeatedly, the closure of Lynwood Elementary School would not necessarily be a closure of the dual immersion program. And if we were to close Lynwood and the board was not committed to having a full dual immersion strand continue elsewhere, we would need to put in places resources to make sure we support our kids through 5th grade. Closing Lynwood would effectively end the dual immersion program because the entire school was part of the program. I disagree with that. And I've touched on that one repeatedly. So we'll keep moving. Has the district considered the cost of transportation for students to attend other schools? There are many for whom transportation will be a hardship. The district has not done school to home transportation outside of what's required in IEPs for a very long time. And I don't believe that the board would take action to restart home to school transportation. So I know that would be a hardship for some families. But I don't anticipate that that is something that would be added. How is it that 2 of the schools on the closure list have some of the largest English learner, low income Latinx populations? I think we've touched on this a couple of times. Can you give us 3 specific examples of how you are using an equity lens for the decision on school closure? I am not using an equity lens. I'm not listing any of the schools that end up coming before the school board. We have shared all of the data on all of the schools with the 7-Eleven committee. The 7-Eleven committee, which is representative of families and the breakdown of our community have made the decision thus far to reduce it to those 3 schools. Considering the high number of low-income families at Lynwood, would it be equitable for the burden of a school closure to be on the low SES families? You know, these are all hard questions. The reality is that closing a school is going to be a hardship on someone. Lynwood is close to some other schools, and we believe that the 7-Eleven committee believes that because of that, it should be considered on the list. You know, I know this is hard, but it is where we are right now. So I'm sure that the many members of the 7-Eleven committee are watching this. They've received the letters from the Lynwood community, and they will be exploring them. Next question. I'm troubled by the nature of this presentation and thought exchange tool. Spanish speakers in Lynwood are disenfranchised by this process. I'm a little confused by that, and probably that's in part because I didn't explain well enough to our English-speaking community how this process works behind the scenes. So families get to select the language that they're interacting with in this process. And if you select English, you see all of the comments and thoughts in English, whether they were written in English or Spanish. If you selected Spanish, you see all of the comments, whether they were written in English or Spanish, in Spanish. So they have the opportunity to see all the comments that are presented. They have the opportunity to rate all the comments in their native language or whatever language they're most comfortable in. And this meeting is being translated live by Isabel, who does a lot of these meetings and is really respected in our communities for helping the community. I think we've talked about this one. What would happen if dual immersion program were to close? When transportation is a priority for both the committee and the Department of Education, why would you close Lynwood where 31% of the families walk to school? This will be a good consideration for the committee to determine. How can NUSD stem losses to private schools with a limited budget without offering innovative programs like Lynwood's DI program? I believe that Lynwood's DI program can be a draw and can retain students in our district. I also believe that the biggest reason we're losing students to private school was COVID and our move to remote learning and our move to hybrid learning. And we will do all we can to recapture those students like every other school district in California. The data the committee determined on the cost per students, did this take into account the additional funds the school receives for EL students? That's a great question. I'm not sure if anyone on the screen can help us with that. It's a great question. So let me look into that, and if I find that it didn't, then I will certainly share that with the 7-Eleven committee. Can you address the misleading nature of the cost per student data that King Consulting presented to the 7-Eleven committee? Our 4th and 5th grade GATE program was moved before DI had a chance to grow. If you add back the GATE program, our cost per student is $1,584. So if that's accurate, we'd be happy to share that with the committee. So Rob and Laura, can you take a note of that and look into that for us? That would be great. We've talked about dual immersion is important. I 100% agree. Why is a specialized school with specific constraints being compared to traditional schools? There are no footnotes on the numerous charts and tables. The way the data is shown to how people make decisions. Best practices for data reports require footnotes when constraints are not equal. Thank you for sharing that thought. Why is the district not happy with our enrollment? I don't believe that the district is unhappy with your enrollment. I believe that Lynwood is a small school. And we have to look at our small schools to see if they are helping us to operate efficiently. We have significant fiscal constraints coming in the 22-23 school year. We need to be prepared to address them. We feel like we should have closed a school probably several years ago. We didn't do that, and now's the time for us to consider that. What happens to the grant funding for the DI program if Lynwood were to close? Marin Community Foundation is one of the outside funders of this program. Does the money have to be refunded? No, grant funding once allocated does not need to be refunded. MCF has been funding grants to almost all of our elementary schools for several years, Lynwood being one of them. When you review test scores with the 7-11 committee, will you educate them on the biases regarding standardized tests? Absolutely, we've touched on that previously. What will happen with the ELL students that have not completed the program? So this would be if the school was closed and the dual immersion program was not continued, then I would need to work with the board to make sure that we had a plan to support these students as they navigated through 5th grade and hope that they were supportive of that plan. Closing Lynwood would be the most disruptive option for the entire district. I appreciate that perspective. I think that probably other schools would share the same logic, but I do appreciate that closing any school will be traumatic for our district and their community. The DI program is different. The cost per student metric was a known challenge at the beginning of the program. As by design, new students can't join in. The implied value of minimizing investments in our children is troubling as a parent, and this metric is unfair to a program that can't get new kids. Our 7-11 committee saw a whole lot of data points, and one of them was the per student cost. That was certainly not the only data point that was taken into consideration. And I agreed to you that you have a fair point that it is harder and a rare thing that we're able to bring kids into a dual immersion program, especially after 1st grade. Understanding that bilingual education has been proven to be a superior teaching method that provides greater benefits to students later in life, how will the board be able to provide an equivalent education for my child elsewhere in Novato? As shared, it'll be up to the board to make that determination if they feel like they can move forward with a dual immersion program elsewhere, or how we will meet the needs of the students currently enrolled in the program through 5th grade. I agree, DI is very important for our community. How do you address the equity issue of closing schools with the majority of student body qualifying for free or reduced lunch program? We get our students to schools where they're going to find success. We believe in all of our schools, and we believe that by getting these students to other schools, our job is to help them find success. It isn't to help them find success within a certain building or at a certain school. We need to help them find success, and that's what we will strive to do. Anybody who wants to see how the schools were being considered for closure were selected, and also see that all schools were under consideration can watch the videos from the meetings. They're all recorded. They're all available to you to see. They all happen very much in the public. Again, you can find them at NUSD. You have to Google it. I don't know the exact URL, but if you Google NUSD 7-11 committee, you will find our website, and you can see all the videos there, and you can see for yourself what that process looked like. The district continued to fail English language learners to close the achievement gap because they saw the DL school that uses an approved method to support students and EL students. I think what we're saying is maybe if we close this program, that would be failing to support our students. Here's what I say, our district has struggled to close the achievement gap, like all districts in California. I don't want to use that as an excuse. We need to do better. We need to find the best ways to serve our English learner students and close that gap. We're committed to doing what we can to make that happen. We touched on closing Lynwood would be the most disruptive option. Before the 3 schools were chosen for possible closure by vote, why didn't the committee reflect back on the 3 criteria for closing a school? The California Department of Ed's guidance on closing a school focuses on 3 criteria: reduce disruption, consider ethnic balance, and transportation. I think it's presumptuous to say that they didn't consider those things, but it's possible that they didn't. I believe that they did think those things through. We probably could have made that more transparent. If Lynwood closes, how would students of every grade level who started in the dual immersion program be supported through the 5th grade? We've talked about that a couple times. Closing Lynwood with its dual immersion program is not fair to the kids and families who made the commitment to the special program. Would be an unfair burden. I've shared that those 2 things are not necessarily linked, and I would encourage the board to find a way to support those kids through dual immersion through the 5th grade. How will you address families who walk to their neighborhood school that need transportation if the school is closed? We've touched on this. We don't anticipate that we'll be providing transportation for home to school for children. We haven't done that for several years. And this will be an impact on whichever school is closed, should the board make a decision to close a school. Closing Lynwood would mean that a lot of people who do not own transportation will have to make arrangements to attend school. How is this being addressed? This is not currently being addressed. We haven't gotten to that point in the process yet. I'm sure that will be discussed as we get to the specific scenarios associated with each school. And I know that the committee and the board and myself have heard from lots of community members about this important topic. We've discussed the equity parameters or lack thereof in the decision to close a school. Why are materials still not available in Spanish and translation not provided at 7-Eleven and board meetings? We touched on this. There will be translation available at all 7-Eleven meetings and board meetings moving forward, as the minutes will be translated as well. Save Lynwood, it's an excellent school. Thank you for that thought. We've talked a lot about cost per student, but why doesn't the district make decisions based on equity, the district's values, and the profile of a graduate? I think that all of these things need to be considered. Thank you. We talked about the cost per student data, and we will look into that moving forward. And I have them, if there's any changes, we'll make sure we share that with the committee. How is the DI program supposed to increase enrollment if the school housing it is selected to close? This seems like a clear kill to the program. So I think we're tying a couple things together. We're not talking about closing the dual immersion program. We're saying that the Lynwood School is on the potential closure list. I don't know how teacher housing has gotten tied into this. I've also shared that I am highly doubtful that teacher housing would be built on any of the sites associated with the school closure, any of Rancho, Lou Sutton, or Lynwood. The committee decided, after looking at all the data, that Lynwood should be one of the 3 schools considered for school closure. Concern over closing Lynwood and how this will impact the current native Spanish speaking students. I think that closing a school is difficult. We have lots of great schools in our district, and we're confident that whatever school our students end up in, they're going to have the opportunity to thrive. I don't want the district to close the school. Honestly, I don't want the district to close any school. Nobody wants the district to have to close any school. Unfortunately, this is the circumstance that we find ourselves in. And we need to make these hard decisions for the fiscal future of our district and to make sure that we're able to meet all of our fiscal goals in the future. I sympathize with the parents of any school that closes. However, the disruption for an English learning family is a one-time event. The lifelong learning disruption, especially for English learners, can be devastating, as your data proved. Look inward at the data that you already have. I'm not sure exactly what that means, if we're talking about the dual immersion program. I don't know that having a student move from one school to another is a lifelong learning disruption. I would argue that point, but I will acknowledge that closing a school is hard and it has an impact on its school community. Lynwood gets money from the state and federal government from foundations. What are the district's plans to get access to those funds? State and federal money follows the children. So where the children go, that state and federal money will go. We would need to work with Marin Community Foundation to determine, Marin Community Fund to determine what happens with the dollars that they have traditionally allocated, whether it's to Rancho or to Lou Sutton or to Lynwood, to determine what happens with that money. So we'd have to work with the granting agency. Thank you for your thought that we need to save Lynwood. We, the Latinos, are going to be affected by this decision. We don't have enough transportation. I know that's going to be a challenge should Lynwood be closed, also at Lou Sutton. And I don't have a solution for that right now. We've talked about supporting students through the 5th grade. Will the campus upgrades per school affect which campus close? Lynwood just installed AC units per in each classroom. No, the amount of campus upgrades does not have an impact on this decision. All these schools, Lynwood just had air conditioning put in. Lou Sutton hasn't had theirs yet, but will soon. Same with Rancho. Why don't enrollment projections shared with the committee note that a DI program like Lynwood has the potential to become a magnet program? I think you could make the case that any of our schools could potentially become a magnet program. The reality is that Lynwood hasn't grown significantly since we started the dual immersion program. It stayed relatively the same size. If Lynwood saw what happened to NUSD's free preschool and daycare programs, and families desperately need the one they can arrive walking. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure. I think that I shared earlier that the preschool programs would continue at the Lynwood campus is my assumption. The daycare program, the after school care program would probably follow the students. It depends on where we end up having the Lynwood students go and whether that new school meets the requirements for the program, but we've already begun investigating that with the California Department of Education. Is there data on the 25% of students who come from other regions area to Lynwood on why they are choosing to attend Lynwood, if I heard correctly? Is there data on the 29? I'm pretty sure those 25% of the students who come to Lynwood are going there for the dual immersion program is my understanding of why they're attending there. The district keeps failing to bridge the redemption gap. I agree that our district needs to do a better job of closing the achievement gap or the opportunity gap with our English learner students, our students living in poverty, our other students of color, and we work hard every day to improve that process. My daughter just started school in the new year and loves it. I'm very concerned to hear about possible closure. Hang in there as we go through this process. I know this is hard. What will happen to students in their neighborhood elementary school that will possibly close? as a mother, my concern is knowing where my student would now attend. So we will have 15 months between the time that the board makes a decision and the time that this closure would take effect, which would give us time to figure out all of the details, help communities build bridges together, help the school that would be receiving new students have opportunities to bring the new students into that bubble, into that culture, so that when they arrive for their first day, it doesn't feel like a place they don't know. It'll also give the new school an opportunity to create new traditions with their new students. So those are some of the things that we're committed to with whichever school ends up closing. So we don't know yet where any students would go in the event of school closure. We know it's likely that students would go to the schools that are closest to the schools that they're currently attending. I agree that every school is important to the community, and I agree that Lynwood is particularly important. I totally understand the concern about this being a community circle. It is frustrating to me that we can't do this face to face. It's frustrating that we have to do this during the pandemic. We use this process as the best way to get feedback from the community so that we could hear all your thoughts and questions. And we're committing the time it takes to get through these questions. I wish we could be in the same room together. I wish that they do not close the school, because then my kids will not be able to go to school. We're going to continue to support you being able to get your child to a school that's as close to your home as is possible, if Lynwood is the school that's chosen. We've talked a lot about what will happen with the program moving forward. Thank you for your perspective. This is a weak attempt. What are the main factors you're looking at when deciding which school to close? You can see, if you go back and look at the 7-11 committee meetings, you can see all of the different data points that have been shared. There's a lot of things that have to be explored, which is just starting with the feasibility, the ability to even close a school. We've looked at attendance trends at schools. We've looked at cost per pupil. We've looked at lots of different data points. And you can see them all at the 7-11 website. It's a great sign of the culture at Lynwood School and of the program at Lynwood School that the students have remained there during the pandemic. We see that. Yes, there is a Spanish version of this tool, and you can actually see, like, for example, where it says, "We hope that not closing the school is the future of our children." You can see that that was translated into this version. The Spanish speaking community used this tool in Spanish. I just shared a lot of the data points that are being considered. I appreciate the perspective that we hope that not closing the school is in the future for our children. We talked about Ron Gerber and any potential conflict of interest, so we'll follow up with Ron to see what that might look like. So the 7-11 committee, it is probable that they will make a recommendation to the board that will go to the board on March 5th. And it is possible that the board could make a decision to not close the school. They will have a debate, they will talk about it, and in the end, they will make a decision, and we will support their decision, whatever that decision is. They are the elected officials charged with making these sort of terrible decisions. Is there a possible solution at families reach so none of the schools can close? Again, that's a possibility that no schools would close. But we'll just have to see what happens as we go through the process. I appreciate the strong feelings about Lynwood, and it's the best school and it's an amazing place. I agree with all that. So I appreciate that perspective. Glad to hear that this program has served your son with an IEP so much in the program. I just want you to know how important I think it is to raise bilingual kids. You know, it's something that I very much believe in. I had the opportunity to enroll my kids in a dual immersion program when it was starting up. I wasn't as brave as you all were. I didn't enroll them in the program, and I don't have a lot of parenting regrets, and that is one of my biggest parenting regrets, that I did not enroll them in that program when they were little, and now they do not speak a second language. DI is the only program or school where families made a specific commitment. I think that parents at other schools would disagree with that, but I appreciate your perspective there. The district continues to fail. I think we touched on this one. And I do appreciate that DI is a great way to support English language learners. We need more time. NUSD committed to DI. What happened? Why the change of course? As I've shared, our district is facing significant fiscal challenges, and we need to consider closing an elementary school. And so we have a committee that's come together and has made their best recommendations so far to narrow it down to these 3 schools. And closing Lynwood doesn't show a lack of commitment to DI. It shows that maybe DI needs to happen differently, and we'll have to see what happens with those important decisions moving forward. Okay, are we at the bottom, Leslie?
We are.
Okay, so how would students grades K-5 be supportive if DI is closed? And I appreciate that this one isn't particularly rated, probably because it came in at the end, but we've talked about that a number of times, is that if the decision were to close Lynwood and the decision were not to have an ongoing dual immersion strand, I would commit to working with our board to make sure we find a way to support our students in dual immersion through their conclusion of 5th grade. So with that, we've gotten through all of the thoughts, questions, comments. I acknowledge that this is not the most ideal way to have to hold this meeting tonight. I do appreciate everyone who has attended. We have 253 people in attendance. I appreciate everyone sharing their thoughts and concerns with us. I acknowledge this is a very hard process to have to go through. I hope you, at least in some ways, appreciate that we're holding these meetings and sharing, giving you an opportunity to share your questions and being present to answer them as best we can. There's a 7-Eleven committee meeting coming up on next Wednesday night. You can address the 7-Eleven committee by either at that meeting or by submitting letters to them. Just added to the chat bar was the 7-Eleven web page so that you can access that if you're unable to find it. And with that, I will say thank you one more time. Thank you to everybody who's on the panel. I didn't lean on you all very much tonight, but I appreciate you being there. And thanks to our community. Take care. Bye-bye.